I'm just going to say hello to everybody who's watching, and I'll read your comments and answer any questions, and perhaps we could talk about a few subjects. Perhaps I could show you a few medieval weapons as well. Let's just try to change the angle of the live stream. There we go. I'm not in my Viking clothing. I've just not been organised today to be doing any filming in my Viking or medieval Norse kit. But yes, how is everybody? I thought I'd just come on just to see who's about, testing the live stream, and also this is about also building what's the word? Oh, I've forgotten. Wait a minute. Well, a routine, but also building that live stream, daily live streams, just to build up momentum. That's the word. Couldn't quite think there. And I am drinking a cup of tea, but it's in a pint glass. And I must say, these are my favourite pint glasses. I love a good pint jug. And surprisingly, you can make a cup of tea in it. And just make sure you put a spoon in there. So say hello. Don't be afraid to come and join the live stream. And if you've got any comments, this will be a generalised live stream. And perhaps we're going to look at a few medieval weapons, and perhaps we'll check them for the safety aspect and also run through them. And I've got a file. So this is one of the essential things you always take on camp, so that you can check your weapons and make sure that you got no burrs. And this is what the fundamental live stream is going to be about. Because the reason why you do this is because when you're going into a battle reenactment and you're using blunt weapons, this is why we have a rounded edge. Because normally in Viking swords, if we compare a more sharper one, it's not fundamentally sharp, but it's got a point to it compared to this one. Let me just put this file down and we'll compare the two. If you see the two, you'll see one is pointy and one is rounded off. And there's a reason for that, because most of my medieval weapons are actually blunt for combat. Because the one thing you don't want to do is take this into a Viking, reenactment. And I must say, it looks quite nice as it glares all the way down. And just had a WhatsApp message from Rickardson, my Viking brother, and I must say that's very shiny. I know it's not probably the best lighting in here. I've got to sort the lighting out in this room at some point. But so the reason why we have a blunt, sword is basically because of safety. So this is a combat blade, and this is another Paul Binns. I own quite a few Paul Binns. You can always tell a Paul Binns blade because of the quality, and it's quite amazing these days when you think about it. That from last night's live stream, somebody's just paid £800 for a Paul Binns blade with a good scabbard or sheath. I think it's a scabbard he brought, and it's got bone and all manner of things on it. So that's a lot of money. But then again, you pay for what you get these days, and yeah, I mean, I suppose if you go in a second-hand market, you may be able to get something like this from a second-hand Paul Binns for sometimes it can be cheap, but sometimes people ask too much money. So never be afraid to barter. So on this one, no, I would never sharpen this one because this is a combat blade, and of course I use it in my battles, and it's such a lovely blade. So I would never sharpen this one. But on this one, as you let me bear with me, I could sharpen this and I could run a stone over it, because I know it's got a bit of an edge, but it's still blunt enough where I could run my hands down it. But I could actually think about sharpening this. And this is I think it's one of the Chinese blades. I think it came from Turkey. I can't remember if I bought it off him, or if he gave it to me to sew. I can't remember now because it's been too long. But I could at some point think about sharpening this so that we can actually test it on camera. We'll get some melons and see whether we could chop some melons in half and maybe try to slice in half some bottles and so forth. And it's not bad. This is one of the cheaper ones you can get online. And the grip is quite nice because it's not too short, but it's not too long either. Although I don't like the pommel too much because it's just a little bit on the thin and small side. But it's got the nice shape. But to me, when they made this sword, they just didn't really put enough effort into making a nicer, thicker crossguard, because the crossguard also is very thin, made from brass naturally. But in my mind, if you compare the two, wait a minute, so you compare these two pommels, you look at the difference between that one and that one, a vast difference. That's really accurate and is based off a find, where this one is just a modern interpretation, and they've just been a little bit skimpy, a little bit tight when making it. And it's fair enough, because, you know, if you're making and casting these in you know, Asia, in China, and you don't have an actual Viking sword to go from, then they're going to look at the pictures, but they're not going to fundamentally about doing the real in-depth research, actually figure out the size and the diameter and the weight of the pommel, because the pommel is an important aspect of it, because it adds that balance and that weight. So the balance in this is going to be slightly off because that pommel isn't heavy enough. So yes. So don't forget also to love and like the live stream, and call it a long stream then. I don't know why I'm thinking about long bows for some reason today. And then Leonard Arola says, way longer than the one here, only 31 inches from pommel to tip. Yeah, I mean, if I had a ruler, I could measure them, and perhaps in another video. I did do a live stream, I think last year, when I went through the lengths and all the diameters of Anglo-Saxons. So perhaps in another detailed video, I'll sit down at my Viking or Norse table and have a few swords, and we will have a ruler out, and we will actually measure and see what the lengths are and compare the two, because I think that would be quite interesting, and that will give us something else to do a live stream on. And then perhaps we'll also compare much later swords to the Viking and Norse blades. We could compare some 19th century swords, which I do have lying about and knocking about the place, but not at the moment over here. And then I have this interesting sword, but I don't know what to do with this. And I don't know where it came from. I think it either came from Turkey's garage, it's a much later medieval sword, or it came from a skip. But at some point I got to, and it's very rusty, I'm sure you agree. And I did have the handle originally, but it had broken off. So I got to heat treat this, take this crossguard off, and then think about making the sword a bit longer. And I reckon I could probably utilise it into another blade. But it's just one of those projects I've never got onto. And you can slightly see where I've been grinding the rust off slightly with the metal underneath. So it's still good. It's a short one, of course, naturally. But this is a much later double-handed sword. So whether we roll the new handle on or whether we make it into a Viking blade is a whole entire story. And then this has a convex fuller rather than a concurve, which you would see on some of the other blades. And and one of the perils of being a Viking and Norse reenactor, you end up with broken swords. I mean, here's another one. And I think I could probably grind a new tang onto this and make it into a new sword at some point, even though it will probably end up being a bit shorter our desired length. So there, on this one, you could see the fuller, or the blood groove, as we often call it, but that's not the correct term. I always like to call it a fuller and describe it to people in being that sense. And then, of course, this has the complete opposite of a concurve fuller. This has a convex fuller. So this is a little bit later than the Vikings. And then this is just a very old blade. And I'd love to know how old it is. I reckon it's got to be 40, 50 years old, if not older. And it's just been knocking about. It was down my workshop. I got a friend of mine who owns a country estate, whose family came over with William the Conqueror in 1086, or 1066, not 1086. He got the land in 1086 from William before he died. But this was being lined in my workshop for many years as I dropped my sword on the floor. This is Paul Binns. Yeah, I mean, I do love a good sword. And yes, it is a very large crossguard. No doubt it's been actually made by a blacksmith, and it's a slightly raised in this section, so it wants coming off. It wants heating up on one of my forges. And then I reckon I can knock it off and reuse that. But whether I put it back onto this blade or whether I actually roll a new handle and just have it as a display item, because there's no way on earth you could ever turn this into a combat blade, but you could make it into a collector's piece and a display piece to hang on your wall. And then last night when I was round my neighbours having a quick pint of ale from Dorset, very nice beer actually, he was saying, well, why don't you, sort out your room in here and hang all your swords up? So that's something I may think about doing. I've always been the theory when you collect weapons, you should always have them locked away in a room and not have them too many on display. Because certainly if the police come round and see all the weapons, although they can't take them because as a collector, you're quite allowed to have weapons in your house as a collection or as a part of a reenactment group. I've always been a bit like that about displaying them. But I think it would look rather cool having all my swords on the wall. So perhaps another idea for another day. So anyway, how are you all today? Let me know in the comments how you're doing. I've had a good day. I've been busy. I didn't go to bed until about 2 in the morning. I was doing a bit of work on the channel, looking at a few videos, making some thumbnails. I watched a bit of TV, had a very late dinner. So Josh says, good evening. And Josh says, that's a massive crossguard. It is a very big crossguard. It really is. It kind of determines it's a much later blade. So it's probably more 13th, 14th century. And it would have been originally a double-handed sword. And I swear somewhere I must have the handle because I recall in my memory having the handle for it. And it's got a round pommel. And then Josh saying, I've got a cabinet for mine. Is it a lockable cabinet or is it like a cabinet for, is it like a shotgun cabinet or a display cabinet? Because fundamentally I got down here, which if I put my camera down, you can see this wooden chest. It's a Viking chest. So that's just full of weapons, which I don't always get out. And that's just where I store them. If I'm going away for the weekend, I try to put them all away. But naturally, I can't fit all my weapons in there. And, I'll get 40, 50 weapons in that really nice Viking Norse chest, and it's got the old mechanism, so it's got a very unusual key. And then I also lock the room up as well. I've got the ability to lock this door up and to keep it safe, and I never open my curtains, so anything's on display. And then naturally I got a big burglar alarm system and CCTV, so I'm very well protected in the house. So forgive me whilst I drink some tea. I've just been editing a very long video, which is a very unusual video, but I won't tell you about it yet because I'm kind of debating about whether I should put it on YouTube. And it relates to a video at the moment which is going viral. And I think in the last 48 hours, we've done over 250,000 views on one video. Yeah, that's another story. We've got 10 people watching. Well, thank you so much for joining the live stream. And I'm trying to build up momentum and I'm trying to do a live stream every day. And I was upstairs thinking, I've got to do a live stream tonight. I might be going out later on doing a bit of dumpster diving because I do that in my spare time now and again. I try not to get into it too much. And I know all about the legality of dumpster diving. And you'd be amazed what I find. I very rarely buy bread because most of my bread will come for free. I get a steak for free. And, the other week last week we got 50 packets of crisps. So, we've got Miss Valentine. Hello from the Wirral. Oh, hello. Yes, my old friend Smokey used to live in the Wirral. And he's passed away now. One of my old comrades I used to go reenacting with. So I've been up there a few times in my time. And it's a lovely place in the world. And of course, very well known for the Norse. And then Josh says he's got a cabinet. Yeah, because I used to be a 19th century reenactor. So I've had a shotgun license on and off and a what you call a black powder license. Although I never had the acquire and keep. You can have a require and you can have a require and keep license. And quite funnily, if you're having, black powder in your house, you normally have to have it in a separate box and then you chain it to something like your radiator, which never kind of made sense to me. But it's got to be somewhere where the fire station and the fire people know exactly where it is so they can break it and get it out of your house if your house is on fire. So I got a good big size shotgun cabinet, which I could use to put my swords in, but I won't get too many in. I'm probably only going to get, 10 in there at the most. And of course, normally they're located in your attic or in your garage. But it's another option if you want to have a cabinet to lock away your weapons. You don't have too many of them. Then think about buying a second-hand or a brand new shotgun cabinet, because they are very safe, and once you've got them fastened to your wall, they're very difficult to get off if you do it properly. But also they've got such an excellent locking mechanism with 2 keys. It's also very difficult to get in. Because let's face it, if you are a serious collector and you're buying swords that are worth £3,000-4,000, you want to keep them safe. So Joyce says, do you own shotguns as well? I've got a license too. No, I don't have any shotguns anymore. I kind of sold them off a few years back because I wasn't using them, and I didn't have shotguns. I had muskets, so they all come under a shotgun license, the muzzle loaders. But so I had a license for got to be 7 or 8 years now, because I've not been in the 19th century reenactment scene doing it, and whether I'd get another one, I don't know, because it's always a lot of hassle trying to get a shotgun license these days, especially these days. And the amount of rigmarole and paperwork you have to go to is a lot. But if I get back into 19th century reenacting and maybe think about rejoining the American Civil War Society, then I'm going to be more interested in actually going to film and make content for the society, because that's naturally where my skill is. And then Leonard, who only says treasure and loot. Oh yes, I mean I do have a lot of nice things. Silver. I mean I got quite a bit of silver. I mean, check this bad boy out, which is a copy of the Silverdale Norse or Viking, brooch. I mean, and that is really big. You put that on your shoulder, you definitely know about it, and it definitely is saying that this is a very wealthy Viking. In fact, it's really too big to have on your shoulder, and the pin is extremely sharp. And normally with this, we have a little bit of a antler, which we fasten on the end to stop it from stabbing into people. But and it's not solid. This will be hollow, so the pipe and the tubing will be hollow, and this will be hollow, the pin. And then these are 2 mountains which are being cast in half and then soldered together. But that again, and that will be hollow as well. And if it was solid silver, that would be really, really heavy, and you definitely know about it. But it's just fits on your shoulder. But I'm sure you agree, if you're walking about with a massive pin like that, then that could really hurt somebody, and it has. I've stabbed myself in the neck a couple of times with this, so that's why somewhere in the house there's a bit of an antler end, and it's fastened with a bit of leather, and the leather attaches to the body so that you can put it on the end and to stop yourself from stabbing somebody, because and again, that's a really lethal thing if you got to get yourself out of a situation, and especially if you're a Norse woman, then one of them could be quite lethal at the wrong situation. And especially if a Norse or a Saxon is charging into their house, a woman is going to defend her children to the last thing, let's face it, because women are very protective and can be very fierce. So if a Norse warrior or a Saxon comes in and she rushes at him with that in the neck, I don't think he's going to survive, is he? So, and I got to sort this room out a little bit. I got so much reenactment kit. I mean, I got Roman stuff, I got Anglo-Norman stuff, I got Anglo-Saxon stuff. It really is a lot, but I want to get more because you can never own enough. And then Josh says that's a bit big, isn't it? Yes, but it's a copy in the same size of the Silverdale brooches, so it's an actual reproduction, and it's a really nicely made one. So Josh said, looks annoying. Yes, it can be very annoying if you're wearing it, and I've certainly been in a situation where I'm wearing a cloak and it's got on my nerves. So I don't often wear it. I choose to have a nice iron or simple bronze brooch around my cloaks because I prefer them. And Leonard says, wow. Then we have a comment here, and I can't quite read your name because it's in the italics, which I can't quite understand. So why am I always given Monty Python videos after this? Well, I don't know. Perhaps because we're English and Monty Python is a funny English thing. I mean, but then again, you might be given snippets of, you know, Blackadder, or snippets of Only Fools and Horses. And then Miss Ballantyne says, is there a particular kind of insurance you need for all your gear? Well, no, because it all comes under your house insurance, but you do have to declare it when you have your house insurance sorted. And luckily, my house is sorted on a separate thing. It's a long story. So as long as you declare it amongst what you got in the house, and yes, if you've got really expensive things, you may want to declare that separately and photograph it and send it to your insurance company. But then again, it's also important that when you have nice, fine kit, and especially if you've got expensive jewellery, but let's face it, people get jewellery passed down from their parents and their grandparents, and you'd be surprised how some, you know, rings with diamonds in are worth tens of thousands of pounds. So for those situations, you need to photograph what you got and keep a record of it, and then fundamentally insure it separately on another insurance. And then shop around, because that will also give you a better deal than going through your main insurance company. You go through a broker for that. And then when it comes to reenactment and insurance, then all societies will have insurance of their own. And I think, you know, going back 10, 15 years when the group we was in, we were getting insurance for 30 people. It was about £500 just to ensure that when we're on the, you know, a site, everything's insured for the battle. And it's important that you have insurance, but you could also get individual reenactors insurance as well, which is not very expensive really, but it's worth doing it if you ever get yourself in a situation. Let's say, you know, you're in a battle and you get your teeth knocked out, or you break a leg, then that's going to be covered, and you're going to be covered for any loss of earnings for that insurance. That's not fundamentally the case if it's insurance through a reenactment group. And then Josh says, what's the best way to learn how to sharpen up your weapons? Well, no doubt there are going to be videos out there that will show you how to sharpen a weapon, whether you want to do it by hand or use a modern grinder. I mean, some people even just use an angle grinder, but I don't really like that, because the thing about angle grinders, they tend to put a slight concave edge on your whatever you're sharpening. I'm really good at sharpening things because I've been sharpening things as an engineer for years and years. And whenever I was at work, when I was working engineering, people would always come up to me and say, you know, oh, can you sharpen my lawnmower blade? Can you sharpen these knives for me? Can you sharpen my axe? And because I got that experience of using a grinder, I can just sharpen things razor sharp. But you have to go over with a stone afterwards as well. And sometimes you use a leather, you know, what you call it, a leather strap, just to give that extra edge. And then you finish with a stone, and you know, but it's an art form to grind, and it really is. But the more time you spend sharpening something, then naturally the better it's going to be, and the sharper it's going to be, to the point where it's razor sharp. And some of these really nice tools you can get, which are like diamond sharpeners, are really, really good as well. You can get hand-old ones, and then you could also get devices for knives, so that you can have like a device, and your knife is in a jig, and then you go along the edge, and it puts the right angle on, because it's also about getting the right angle when you're sharpening things. And I've got quite a lot of things which I could do with sharpening. It's like, I mean, this sword here, do I choose to actually put a sharp edge on this? And even though it's classed as a sharp sword, it's just a blunt sharpening. So it's been sharpened, but it's not been sharpened to the point where it will cut you if you run your hand along it. And if you did that on TikTok, your video will be removed, because that will be classed as a dangerous act. So YouTube is a little bit more advanced, and I love how it just shines all the way down the sword like that. That's absolutely wonderful, that is. And I do love a shiny sword. And I've got a few swords I need to really think about polishing. I've got one somewhere. I think it's this one. This one needs polishing, because when it was left for a long time, it was rusty. So this has been in a blaster and been blasted, but you can tell it's just got that dull look to it. So at some point I need to get a mop and actually grind this. And this is a really nice sword. I think this is a Denby. So a Denby is a very old make from the 1980s, and they're like rocking horse shit. You just don't hear them for sale. And one of the toughest blades you can actually get. Yeah, and it's had years of use, so it's, you know, the cross guard is loose, and this mounting's loose, and the pommel's loose. And really, fundamentally, what could need happening with this sword is all taken apart and putting back together again. But I kind of got to the stage where I don't really want to do that. And yes, you know, you don't have to have it all firmly fitting. I mean, it's still great as a combat blade, and I'm sure you agree this is a lovely blade, but it just needs polishing. It got a little bit of rust over the years, and because I blasted it to blast the rust stuff, I just never got to the stage where I'm going to get it on a polishing mop and polish it bright like you would see this one. So at some point in the future, I'm going to get this sword to this level of shininess. Because also having it very shiny also protects your sword and stops it from rusting as well. And then, you know, always put oil on, always make sure your blades are oiled, and check your weapons every few months. If you just leave them in a cabinet or in your garage, they can go rusty, then you're going to create yourself more work. But that's a really nice one. I mean, it's got such a lovely pommel, which has been individually stamped and worked on. But because it's been used very heavily over the years, this would have been used much more than a reenactor's sword, because this was used by Turkey when he had a business going around the education system. And Turkey in the 1980s was one of the very first people to actually go around dressed as a Viking. So this would have been used every week for years and years and years. And this is why these are all loose, simply because it's had too much use. But I just love the crossguard. It's got the pattern on from when it's been made on the forge. They've gone along and individually stamped it and caused a pattern. It's a little bit like a herringbone pattern, but it would have been done with a stamp. And then it's got wire, which is a mild steel wire. And I've had to treat that and polish it up a little bit because it was rusty, but it's not too bad now. But it's a lovely sword. Like I said, this is a Denby, and they're one of those very rare mates, and you're never going to hear about a Denby blade. And I'm not sure where they was based, actually. I think they was based in Derbyshire, but I could be wrong. But they are like rocking horse shit. And I got at least 3 Denby blades, and these really are worth a lot of money because of the fact that they're like, you know, very, very rare. I mean, this is much rarer than a Paul Binns blade because you just don't see them for sale. So yes, and that's another one. I love to know what type it is, and I really got to do some research and remind myself and teach myself again the different types of Peterson blade. I really do, and I do have a lovely book on that. But again, it's all about time, and it's all about having that time to research and remind myself and teach myself and get into the habit of understanding the different types of pommels and the different type of blades. So yeah. So yeah, perhaps in the future we could think about demonstrating sharpening. But if I could find some videos and put on the community page, I will do. And I noticed a very new feature on YouTube yesterday. It's called there's a community page for you guys. So you guys can find a video or find an article and actually create a community post for me, and then I can share it. So do think about doing that. If you see a nice article about Norse blades, something to do with the channel, then do think about going to that section of the community page and actually where you could put your own post up. And of course, also if you've got a YouTube channel and you make videos, also think about sharing some of your videos now and again, and I will share them on the channel to give you a shout out, because that's one of the things I've always believed in on YouTube, is that giving people a shout out, especially if you're starting out, you only got a few hundred subscribers. It can be very frustrating, and certainly getting your first 1,000 subscribers can take quite a while if you're not lucky at not having one of those viral videos. But certainly if you're starting out on YouTube, I would definitely start out using shorts format, because that's the best way to get yourself established and you go viral fundamentally and get yourself those 1,000 subscribers. So yes, let's just go back to your comments, because that's partly what we're about today. And I apologise for the clickbaity title, but that was created not by me but by ChatGPT, because I've been looking and thinking about trying to make the SEO and make the live streams a bit more attractive for people to come and join, because a lot of people will see a live stream, they don't know what it's about. And I did take a picture of one of my helmets, which I'll maybe talk about in a few minutes. So Miss Valentine says, did Vikings have to take their swords apart and tighten them? Or is this something that isn't known? Well, if you think about the Staffordshire hoard, that wonderful, collection of, all these fine bits of jewellery, gold and garnets and silver, within that collection, there's a hell of a lot of sword parts. There's a lot of, gold pommels with garnets, and there's a lot of, cross guards, and they're all very finely decorated. But the one thing you'll see in that collection, and there isn't any, is any blades. So what does that fundamentally tell us about, first of all, where did that collection come from? Well, we speculate and we think it probably came from a battle. The Saxons or the Vikings had a battle. After the battle, whoever wins will go along. If all these warriors with fine weapons and swords and spears, they would take them because they hardly sought after, swords, and they hardly sought after sea axes and spears, but especially swords. They wanted the sword blades and not the items and not the cross guards or the pommels. So they would have probably taken them off, put all the mountings, as we call these mountings, into a leather bag, and decided to deposit them in the ground somewhere for another day and come back for them, but they didn't. And then would have taken the blades, because the blades are fundamentally worth more than what the gold is worth and what the nice, really decorated mountings of a sword are worth, because there's a lot of work goes into a blade. Most blades were pattern-welded, and there's a hell of a lot of work from the beginning of getting the iron, if you're getting it from bug iron source, or whether you're buying the ingots in. There's a lot of work involved. It takes more than one person fundamentally to make a pattern-welded sword. So that kind of tells us in that Staffordshire Hoard collection and the hoard that they took all the bits off, and including the helmets. They also took all the helmets apart, because we have that Staffordshire Hoard reconstruction of a king's helmet, which I made a video about some years back. So the blades are worth more fundamentally. But if you had a sword, let's say this was handed down to you, this was your father's sword, but it was often the case because they was often passed down from one generation to another, and it was loose, would they have them taken apart and put back together again? Well, fundamentally, yes, because if you're bothered about it and it got on your nerves, and this don't really bother me that it's loose, it's fine, I could fight with it, it's not a problem. But if you're really particular about it and he said, well, yeah, this sword, I love it, but it rattles, then you'd go to your local blacksmith and you'd say, oh, could you take this apart and put it back together for me so it's nice and solid, don't move? And they would do that. So yes, they would fundamentally think about doing that. But again, it's down to the individual, because everybody's fundamentally different and everybody has their own, perception of a sword, and also the way they want a sword to be. And then Josh, it looks like a type H. Yeah, I think you could be right. I mean, I've got to remind myself, you may have a bit more knowledge on that than I do. I did know a lot about the different types of the swords and when it came to the Peterson sword types, but because I've learned so much, and because I'm not done the hobby for many years, some of it's just gone out my head for some reason, and I got to really sit down and remind myself. I love it if you can get a poster of all the different sword types and hang it on my wall, then I can look at it each day and remind myself. And at the moment, I'm learning different things. At the moment, I'm reminding myself, because I used to do rune casting, and Egil taught me how to be a rune caster, the late and great Egil Thorson. So one of the things I want to do on the channel myself is do my own rune series like Egil did. So at the moment, I'm teaching myself and reminding myself about the older Firth arc, so that I can actually sit down, do some live streams, doing some casting, and then also do my interpretation of a series on the older Firth arc, because originally when we made the first series, we was going to do a whole number of series on the runes, going from the early runes up to the older Firth arc, and then looking at alternative ones like the Northumbrian runes. But because we never quite got organised, and then sadly Egil passed away, we never got to film series 2. So series 2 of that series, which I do want to do, and I may try to do it this year. If not, it'll be done in the next 12 months. I'm going to film a whole series of my interpretation of the older Firth arc runes. And then I think season 3, I'm going to go to the younger Firth arc runes, where there's 34. Then think about doing that on the channel. So that'll be something new. But then we could think about demonstrating and showing what rune sticks are. Here's a couple of examples of rune sticks. So a lot of these have been found in Norway and Sweden and in the UK. Sometimes it will be your name. This one, for instance, is quite a rude saying, if I recall, but I can't recall. And then these are made from ash. And then also we have what you call rune tags. So if you're a trader and you're going, let's say, on your long ship to go and go to Scandinavia, or you're from Scandinavia, you're going to Francia to trade, or you're going to England, then within all your belongings, what you're going to trade, you have one of these so that people know who it belongs to. And these go back way back in time. And like I said, these are ash, and they're just what I made many years ago, and I really do actually love them. And I got a few more, and I'm going to make a few more of these over the time. And these have been burnt in, they're not being drawn on. So I've actually gone out my way, and I've got some authentic tools for burning this sort of inscription into things. And of course, you know, if you go to Constantinople or Istanbul, you go to the big, you know, church, the one with the dome, and you'll find a runic inscription there, one of the pillars. And in fact, I've been there as a child, and that's one of the things I asked my dad to go and see, and I have seen it with my own two eyes. And at some point in the future, I'm planning to go back to Istanbul, because it's a lovely country, as Turkey, and Istanbul is such a lovely city, and it's amazingly massive, and the history there is just incredible. So, you know, I'm going to take my decent camera and my phone and go and film a load of content all over the world, because I got that ability to do that in the future. And that's one of the things, how we're going to expand the channel and take the channel further and progress the journey of what we're doing. But I do love rune staves. I think they're just fascinating. And if you can read it, let me know what it says. I'm still got to remember how to read runes. I can read quite a few of the letters, but it'll take me to sit down and actually read it, and sit down and concentrate for a few minutes and be quiet. So I do love rune staves, and I think they're fascinating. And then we think about how the runes were banned, but yet even into the 19th century, there was runic calendars in Finland, for instance, because Finland didn't really get that taken away from them, like Norway and Sweden, which was kind of demonized as being, you know, bad and not Christian. So, you know, and that's sad, because we lost a lot of that knowledge and a lot of that runic, you know, knowledge, and we also lost a lot of stories as well. And that's also very sad, because how many Viking sagas have been destroyed and been burnt, and we don't have. I think that's really, really sad, really, and sort of a terrible thing for history. And let's face it, in some of the Viking sagas, they're sort of fantastic stories, they really are. And you know, I've read quite a few. I've got quite a few books in my library over there, and upstairs is my library room. And I don't have all the sagas, but I definitely want to try to invest and buy some more and read them at some point, and think about learning to tell you Egil's saga one chapter at a time. But there's such massive tasks to do, and you know, it probably would be easier for me to do the audio and do my own interpretation of each chapter, and then put some imagery to it rather than standing in front of you. But I kind of feel that's not the correct way for me to tell you the sagas. And I'd really love to get Turkey to come along and tell you some more of the stories from the sagas, because there are some fantastic stories within these sagas themselves. They're like stories within the stories, and that's just awesome. So yes, so yeah, excellent. Really enjoying this live stream so far, and I'm glad I came on. And then Leonard Aroli says, "Buffing her." Oh yes, and please do leave a comment. Don't be shy. I mean, if you are shy, you can just, you know, and some people are. Let's face it. We've got, you know, some people are quite out there and willing to say hello, and some people are a little bit shy and think, "Oh no, I'm not going to say hello. I'm a bit shy." Just leave an emoji, because it's all interaction. And don't forget to like and share the live stream, because that's so important. So Miss Valentine says, Agia Sophia has the rune graffiti. Yes, that's that's the one. I can never remember the name of it. And if you ever get a chance to go to Istanbul, and do go to it, and do go and have a look, because it's fascinating, and the museums are wonderful. But Turkey itself is such a fascinating country to go to, and it's a big country as well. I quite like to go on some of the railways and travel around Turkey. It's a bit like you know, the Equalizer. I think it's series number 2, when he's on a train and he has a fight in the train. That's set in Turkey, and some of the scenery. And then you go to some of the Roman temples that are still standing, and some of the cities. It's just awesome, and they really do love their history. And they're such friendly people. And the marketplaces, you know, the bazaar in Istanbul is amazing. You know, literally 4,000 shops in all these underground places, and then the underground reservoirs with the towers. Have you ever seen From Russia with Love, the James Bond film? That's filmed in Turkey, in Istanbul. And you see some of the underground construction, and you think to yourself, well, you know, how did the ancients, how did the Byzantines and the Romans actually build these structures? But, you know, they were very clever, and we always think about the past that, you know, our ancestors not being clever, but, you know, in many ways they're more clever than what we were. Because let's face it, we couldn't build cathedrals today. Could you imagine it? I mean, really building something like York Minster, we couldn't really do it, could we? You know, although amazingly how they managed to rebuild the cathedral in Paris, you know, Notre Dame, and rebuild that is quite amazing as well. And the amount of wood they needed to go and harvest from oak trees all across France and even from England, we donated oak trees for that project. And there's some very good documentaries on rebuilding that. And my dad used to be a singer, and he's actually sung in that big cathedral, as well as all over the world, and Wembley Football Stadium for some reason. So the old joke in the family was that Dad played at Wembley, but that was when he was in the army and he was in a military band. But that's going back a long time in history. So yes, so you got any more questions? Want me to show you any more interesting things? I've got a couple of nice sea axes. We can talk about them. We could talk about Viking axes. We could talk about the clothing and helmets. And my tea's going cold, but I don't mind it cold. So I know somebody asked me the other day, how long have I been into the Norse and been into Vikings? Well, for a very long time, if I'm totally honest with you. I mean, when I grew up as a kid, I was always fascinated with history. And my dad used to buy me history books, and I used to have toy soldiers, which I still got. I tend to hoard things and not throw things away, even though I have sold a few things over the years, and I sold a few Viking things, which I never did. But, you know, people always say to me, well, how long have you actually been into Norse? Well, I can demonstrate this here. So when I was 16, I started working for my dad's company. I was doing an apprenticeship in sheet metal and machinery. And one day I kind of said to myself, oh, I want to make a Viking helmet, even though the cheek plate's coming off and it needs repairing. It's another job for another day. So when I was 16 years old, which was, oh God, over 32 years ago, I made this helmet. I had a book, and this helmet design was on a front page of a book, and I really loved it. I thought, oh, I'd love to make that. So I had a guy help me called Dave. Can't remember his last name. And I made this helmet when I was 16 as a piece for my apprenticeship, showing my skills and my ability in sheet metal. And this was all handmade. It took a lot of hours and a lot of riveting. And the chainmail actually came from my chainmail suit I often wear on camera because it was too long. So I think at some point in the future I'm going to make a riveted set of mail for this and change it over. But it has some leather inside over the mail, because I think it's very important if you're having mail to have a bit of leather on the inside, because it will stop it from snagging your hair. Because certainly chainmail, especially riveted mail, it has a habit of catching your hair. So the last thing you want is your hair to be pulled out by your mail. So this helmet I've had for over 30 years, and it's been darkened by a torch and by putting oil. I mean, you can, there's a few methods you could do when it comes to darkening helmets. And the reason why I would like to have a helmet dark in my mind is because it gives it better protection from rust. So this is why this helmet in 30 years has never gone rusty, because of the fact that it's been darkened. And I know that, you know, I've met people and I've had friends who've gone into Viking reenacting and they want to have a dark helmet. So one of the methods which you can actually do is actually, you know, put some oil on it and put it in your oven. That's been one technique people have used. This one has been done with a torch. So I've gone along with a torch with the heat, and I just heated it up until it got to the stage when it came like this. So yeah, I could do with a bit of oil, which will bring it out a little bit more shiny. And when I made it, I don't like these cheap plates because they're not quite long enough in my mind. I think they could be another inch longer would be better. So whether I actually think about making some new cheap plates for it, and I don't like the hinges. So at some point I'm going to take the hinges off and make some new hinges so it's better connected, and put a new mount on here and a new mount on this cheap plate. But I think I'm going to use these cheap plates on another helmet, and I think I'm going to just make a new set of cheap plates for it, which are a little bit longer, but they're just too short on my face. And I must say, you know, it's been properly worked, so it's got that hammered effect rather than having a smooth effect, because you can have both. You can have a smooth effect on your helmet and a nice shiny helmet, and I don't really have one at hand, or you can go for a more of a hammered effect, and I prefer that. I prefer the hammered effect, because you think about it, a smithy would be hammering it and it would have that indentations from all the hammer blows, but it takes a long time. And you start off with the quarter panels, that's the first thing you make, and then after that you make your crossovers, these bits here, and then you make your next section around here, and then it all gradually goes together. And I think we cheated. I think we slightly rolled it and tacked it together inside to hold it together, and then we ground off the tacks, if I recall. And I never had a lining for it, so again, it's just more shiny on the inside what it would have looked like. I never darkened the inside. Perhaps I should have done, really. That's another job for another day. And then we made, I think the rivets were actually handmade rivets. I think I made them, if I recall. And of course, this is a brass section, but it's got very dull, so at some point get some brasso or some polish, or make some polish from white vinegar with other ingredients, and actually polish it bright again would be quite nice as well. And then I went around the edge with brass, which was quite difficult to do, actually. There's a lot of skill to that, so you can always appreciate when you get a helmet and it's been edged with brass or bronze or copper, that is a really, you know, technical skill to have. But it also demonstrates again how skillful the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings and Norse were, that they could do that to helmets. And the reason why you want to have brass around, you know, your back of your helmet, and you want brass around your cheek plates, is you don't want that sharp edge. So it eliminates that, and it eliminates that danger aspect of your helmet cutting you, because let's face it, you know, that could be quite sharp if it's not been dulled down. So with it having an edge around it, and you'll see it on the other side how it's been soldered together. So there's always more brass on the inside than there is on the outside. And then originally, I mean, this cheek plate hinge isn't very good. So originally it had leather on, but the old leather had perished. So this is the new leather I've been gluing on. And again, it's one of those projects I've not quite got to finishing off, or I have finished it off, but I need to redo things to it. And as always, as a reenactor and a collector of weapons, if you make them yourself and you concentrate on making them, there's always something you have to do and maintain. And of course, the more you have, and the more swords and the more axes you have, and the more, you know, clothing you have, and I've got a hell of a lot of it. It all takes time. And I think on some live streams, when I just figure it out and get my act together, we're going to go through maintaining some of this equipment on camera and demonstrate how I maintain it, because I think that too would be quite fascinating. And yes, so any more comments, any more questions? And then Miss Ballantyne says, that's beautiful work for a 16-year-old. It looks a bit like the famous helmet found at Sutton Hoo. Apparently they wore linen caps under the helmets. Is that true? Well, yes, you can have a linen armour cap, and linen is such a really good material, and then they'd be padded out with a bit of, you know, sheep fleece. Or you can just simply wear, you know, you can have the other one where you can have felt, so you can have a felt lining, because felt was a very old thing, and I know very old material they had the ability to make. And certainly on my Coppergate helmet, which is upstairs at the moment, that has a felt lining, and felt is just made from wool, but they kind of knit it together so it becomes solid. So that's another option. You can have a leather inside as well. So another option for that is have a leather inside, and I've got quite a few helmets that have leather inside as well. Or, you know, you could just not have anything and just wear woolen hats, as long as it fits on your head. And another thing wrong with this helmet is I don't have a chin strap. It never had a chin strap, so at some point I need to make one of them as well. And there's always a job for another day. So yes, so I mean, the main important thing, and especially if you've got a helmet too big, is just to wear a good thick size woolen hat underneath it. And yes, having an armour cap, which is a little bit later than what I think. I don't think the Vikings fundamentally had them, but I'm not certain. I always associate them with being more Anglo-Norman. Then Hashtag says, at the pub, Braggy, we'll watch later. Well, you have a nice few pints. And we're sure one day we could meet up and have a few beers together when I get a van and I start travelling around the UK. because I'm going to buy a van and I'm going to convert it into a camper van is my aim of the game. So just I can go away at the weekend and do some reenacting and go to some castles and film in some locations, and maybe even go abroad with it. I got friends who will have a camper van and they'll drive all the way to Greece. That's pretty amazing, really. And I had one friend once who had a bus and he drove all the way to India. It took him weeks and weeks and weeks, but you really couldn't think you could do that, but he did. And then he spent, a good 2 years in India, then drove back one day. He just got bored and said, well, that's it. He lived with his parents and he said, well, that's it. I'm going to drive to India and live in India for 2 years. So that's what he did. So it's pretty amazing. And then Ismay Hatake says Saladin. Well, again, Saladin is not a person we've really gone into detail with on that age of history, but I would really love to, actually, because Saladin was such a fascinating individual, but also he was a fantastic leader and general. And certainly, if you ever seen some of the movies revolving around that period of history, they're fascinating, aren't they? And I'd love to go to some of the battlefields which happened back in the day. And then Sam Stapleton says, if they didn't use the armour cap because they would just use padded helmets. Well, again, a padded helmet is another way of doing it as well. And you could do that in a few methods. You can either have a padded hat inside of your helmet, or you can have a leather inside and then pack it with sheep fleece. And that's on some of my authentic helmets how it's done. And that's a very authentic method, actually. Yes. Then we've got a comment here from Sam. So I do love to read your comments, because a lot of YouTubers who do live stream don't always read the comments. And yeah, fair enough. If you've got 3,000 people watching, you're probably not going to be able to go and read all the comments. But that's one thing we've always tried to do on the channel. So Josh says, not sure if you answered my question. I was away. Well, was you talking about how to sharpen things? Yeah, well, I'll look to cover that in the future. And if I can find some channel which show you how to sharpen swords, then is also another thing I'll think about doing. And then certainly, I think doing it by hand is better. But you can just have a grinding wheel and you could sharpen an axe or a sword on that. But it's not the most easiest of things. You've got to get the angle right. And I know some people that have had swords and wanted them sharp just use an angle grinder. But the problem with that, you end up with a curve. You may not see the curve, but there is a curve there because of the way the angle grinder is set up. And then some people will have a jig, so they can mount the sword or the axe or the knife, and then they'll have a mechanism to run a sharpening stone over, and then that could be another method of sharpening your sword. But certainly, if you get a hand stone or even one of those diamond sharpeners, you could gradually sharpen it by hand. But there is a skill to it. And then Sam says, do you know how to throw the runes? You spelt it runes, but I assume you're talking runes. Well, yes, because I was into rune casting many, many years ago before I became a Viking reenactor. And I think that's one of the first things I made after the helmet, you see, was making a set of Viking runes. And I've got no idea what happened to them. I think I may have took them on camp. I think I may have gave them away to somebody, or somebody may have took them out of my tent. I don't know. It's been a mystery all my life what happened to that set of runes. And I spent a long time making them into the rectangular form. Because you see a lot of people sew runes on Etsy and on eBay, but they're normally made from a round bit of wood, from a branch that's been sawn off and sanded down. But the problem with that is when you're casting your runes and you've got a round section of wood, you can't always get the accurate reading. So the reason why they're always rectangular in shape is so that you can figure out if your rune is upside down and then determine the meaning better. But again, we could think about demonstrating how to make a set of runes on the channel. And I certainly do want to, and I am at the moment researching and reminding myself and teaching myself the different meanings of the Elder Firth Arc. So at some point, I'm going to record a whole series explaining my interpretation and then cover rune casting as to how Eggle taught me, because Eggle sat down over years and taught me how to actually read the runes. And as he would often say to you, he said, you know, I could tell you what the runes mean, but fundamentally it's up to you to determine what the runes mean as an individual. And you can buy all the books you want in the world, and they're a good reference guide, but you determine fundamentally what the runes mean to yourself and to other people when you cast and read them to people. And I think that's fundamentally true. And then Sam says, I have my dad's authentic runes. Yeah, he got in Denmark, and I would really like to be able to throw and read them. Yeah, well, there is a live stream in the playlist of the older Furthok runes where Egil actually shows you how to actually read the runes and put them out on the table. And, you know, he had a bit of a red cloth, and you see his hand. You don't see Egil, you just see his hands. And that is a very good example of how to read the runes. But of course, a lot of this knowledge has been lost to time because, you know, the Christian church didn't want to have the runes about because they saw them as heathenry and as magic, and there wasn't accepted within the church. So, you know, a lot of the manuscripts and a lot of that knowledge that would have been passed down was fundamentally just being destroyed. You know, whether it's been destroyed physically or whether it's been destroyed verbally, which is very sad, isn't it, really? Because we have lost so much. And, you know, that is sad. Yeah, so let's drink a bit more of my tea. I've got to drink it before it goes cold. You can tell I'm British because I love my tea. But I'd even wake up in the middle of the night and I'm thirsty. I think, well, should I have some water? No, I'm going to make a cup of tea. And I'll get up in the night and then do a little bit. So show you my pattern-welded sword. Wait a minute, I've got to find it. I don't know if I've got it. Oh, I've got it in here. There we go. So here we have the sword that I bought from Turkey about 15 years ago. And this was a sword that was found by Paul Binns. So Paul Binns he found the blade. But the blade didn't have, it wasn't put together. So it was just the blade, and the blade was all rusty. And it was in the back of a Danish blacksmith workshop. And this would be probably in the late 80s or the 90s. I mean, if Turkey was here, he'll probably give you the exact story about it. But because I can't remember everything Turkey had told me, I'd love to get the exact story, and it would make a very good video. But the rough story of how I've always understood it was Paul Binns was travelling around Europe visiting various blacksmiths, because I think if you're into smithing blades and you go away on holiday and there's a local blacksmith, well, I think you're going to go and have a word, aren't you? Going to have a visit and say, oh, hello, I'm a bladesmith. I just come to see your setup, because it's always fascinating to go to somebody else's blacksmith workshop, their smithy, and see how they got the things, you know, where they got the anvils, where they got the, you know, the water tank for cooling things down, how they got the forge set up, you know, what method do they use when it comes to, you know, getting the air in the forge. Do they have a big bellows? Do they have small bellows? Are they using a, you know, a hand-oiled pump? Are they using electric pump? And literally, you know, I've got all, you know, I got bellows. I've never owned a massive set of bellows, even though I've got the fine detailed instructions and drawings how to make a double set of medieval bellows. I just never found a piece of wood big enough, you know, from a good old, you know, oak plank to make them. But it's something I want to do in the future. And I do know there's a pub in Derbyshire near Matlock, and in their pub they've got a massive set of double, you know, old bellows from the 19th century. I went in there once and I saw them, and I tried to say, you know, do you want to sell them to me? I give 100 quid, you know, fair enough, but he wouldn't sell them to me because apparently they belonged to the old blacksmith in the village and they wanted to keep the heritage. And whether they're still there now, I don't know. So whenever you see, you know, a blacksmith workshop on TV, or you see one, you walk past one, I've done this so many times in my life. I've been to a village, to a pub, and they got a blacksmith. So the next day before I go and have a word with the blacksmith and have a look at his setup, because you always learn something, because every smithy has their own way of doing things. So Paul Binns, from the story I was told, was in Denmark, and I think he was probably on holiday or doing some reenactment event. And he went to a smithy, and at the back he saw a sword blade, and it was all rusty to hell. And he started to talk to the smithy, and he said, well, yes, and we're talking about this sword here. And apparently his father made it after World War II in the late 40s or into the 50s, because he was into experimental archaeology and wanted to actually reconstruct and make a pattern welded sword. But, you know, he wanted to do it from scratch. He didn't want to go and buy the iron. He wanted to go and get the bog iron himself. So that's the first thing he did, was he went round all these marshes and bogs, and he had a spear with a metal point. So normally bog iron was a job. Going around bogs and marshes and collecting bog iron was actually a very good high paid job. And you do it by having a spear, you know, or kind of a shaft with a metal point on, so that when you're knocking into the ground, you push it into the bog, you get the resistance, and you can hear that little bit of a tinny noise, which kind of says, well, yeah, there's a lump of bog iron. And then what you have to do is, you know, put your hands in or dig it out, and you get lots of lumps of bog iron. So this is the first thing he did, was collected bog iron. And then from that, you know, and he must have collected quite a lot of it. He smelted that down into and refined it into a better iron. And that's a very complicated and big process to get bog iron, to refine it, to get enough iron to make a sword. So I'd imagine there's quite a few hours of work, you know, probably 100 hours of work just doing that alone. And then he had enough metal, and then he improved the quality of some of it, because the thing about pattern welding, you need better quality steel in between the strips when you're making the strips to make the rods, so that you get that lovely pattern welded in it. And then basically, you know, he made all the, you know, he made it into sheet metal. He cut them into sheets. He put them together into, you know, into little square sections of different quality steel. Then you fire forge them, and then you start twisting them around, so they become solid, and you heat treat them, or you fire roll them together. You know, and you're probably going to need anywhere between 6 to 10 rods, probably, depending on the thickness of the sword. Then eventually, he ended up, after about 600 hours work, from what the smithy told Paul, ended up making this blade. And yeah, it's not, and these days you don't need to go out unless you really want to be really super hardcore when it comes to authenticity. And the only reason why you may go out these days and collect bog iron if you're doing experimental archaeology. And there's different methods of making that bog iron into better iron. Sometimes they'll get layers and layers of wood, and then they'll put wood and charcoal and more wood and more charcoal, and they would actually build up a kind of a raised platform, and then on the top of it they put all the bog iron, and they set fire to it, and the heat is that, you know, hot in that fire, it just burns off all the impurities, and then you just get a massive slag of iron at the end of it. So that's one way of doing it. And there's a video from Ireland from the 1980s which demonstrates and shows this, and that's quite fascinating. So Paul Binns was in this workshop, and he saw this blade, and he started talking about it, and he realised that it was a pattern welded blade. Then he must have brought it off him for a few £100, I don't know how much. And then he took it back home, and eventually he, you know, he made a pattern welded crossguard. You can see the different layers, and he made a pattern welded pommel. Again, you can see the different layers, and he put it together with a walnut handle. This is quite short, to be fair. I mean, this is very early Viking. If not, you could even describe it as a Vendel blade from the Vendel age, not the people, because the Vendels aren't a people. It's an age. It's the pre-Viking culture. And also because the early swords were a lot shorter than the longer swords. And then eventually, he ended up with this sword. He polished it all up, sharpened it, and then you'll see, you know, the pattern weld on it, and it's such a lovely item. It's also got a steel cutting edge, because you need the outer edge not to be pattern welded, so you got a cutting edge. And if I compare it to, let's compare it to this one, you'll see the difference. If I try to get it at an angle, you can see the difference. You know, it's a good 3 or 4 inches shorter, because the early swords were much shorter because of how they constructed them, but also because of the lack of material and the amount of time. And then through time and through the progression of sword manufacturing and making experimentation, they became longer. And of course, the one thing you never do with a pattern welded sword is actually touch your fingers on it. You know, you always hold the edge, and it makes you think how they would have handled swords back in the day. And then this is the Pattern-welded sword, and I paid £1,200 for it in, it's got to be nearly 20 years ago, probably. Yeah, it's got to be. I've had this for 20 years, and on a few occasions people have tried to buy it off me, and I've been offered £2,000-3,000 for it, but I've refused because it's just too much of a nice item, and because I just love these things, I just don't want to sell it. And I'm sure you agree. I mean, you're probably not getting the best lot, but there you can see the pattern mold, and I'm sure you agree that's fantastic. And you think about it, it's 60-70 years old. It really has kept its shine, and it's kept, and it's never been mistreated. I wouldn't like to test this. Maybe a melon. I mean, it's sharp, but it's not sharp enough again that it'll cut me. So I don't want to grind it and make it sharper. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And when Turkey brought the sword, it never came with a scabbard. So this scabbard has been made by a guy called Tony Watkins, and he made the brass mountings at the bottom. And in fact, when he made it, he actually cracked it. You see a crack there, but never mind. I mean, it's the way it goes. He put it on, and he must have cracked when he was hammering it on. And it's just held on with tacks, and it's lined with sheepskin, so sheep fur or fleece, or maybe some felt, just so that it keeps the blade oiled. And it's just such a lovely sword. Again, it's just a demonstration piece, and I've had this for many years. I could do with a bit of belt really, but I don't think the belt is up to scratch. And it's got a nice strap end as well, because strap ends are also quite important. Oh yeah, so you think about it, it's got to be 50 to 60 years old, this, and I got to think about one day what to do with all my things. I think I might donate it to the British Museum, or my weapons, and they can have a Braggy Magnuson display cabinet. Because they are, I got a lovely collection, and I don't want it to be split up. So I got to think about longevity in 50 years' time, when I'm getting towards 100, what to do with it. And I don't want it all individually sold off. I want it kept together, because it's not just got the history of me, but it's also now got the history of being on the channel. So that's also about heritage, isn't it? And heritage is everything really, and it's an important and fascinating thing. And I love heritage, and I really do respect where we come from, which is one of the reasons why we started this channel. It's about heritage. It's about respecting our ancestors. But yes, let's just read some more of your comments. And then Sam says, what's your favourite tea? Mine is Earl Grey. Yes, I like Earl Grey, but Earl Grey's got a slight taste to it. So when I make my tea, I tend to have something like Tetley's or Yorkshire tea, and then I put an Earl Grey tea bag in the teapot at the same time, just to get a confusion of the two teas, and then that makes a much better tea. So if you get Earl Grey, and then just go and buy a standard tea bag, British tea, no doubt you can get it in Texas, and then just put it together in a teapot. You've got to have a teapot really, especially when making your tea. Make sure when you get your teapot, you heat it up beforehand with hot water, because that also makes a better tea. And also, if you put it in a mug or a china mug, heat up your mug as well with hot water, because that also will keep your tea warm and make you a much better tea. Because people have actually studied and made scientific papers on how to make the most perfect cup of tea. And I read one once, it was fascinating, and I saw a video on YouTube talking about how to make a perfect cup of tea. And then Iron Wolf says, good looking sword, 20 years and it still looks great. Well, yeah, I mean, I've had it for 20 years, but Turkey had it for, probably 15, 20 years himself. So it's got to be a 1980s blade, I think. And somewhere on my bookshelf over there, I got the actual book which Paul Binns learnt his skill of making swords, and it all talks about making swords. It's fascinating. One day we'll sit down and I'll show you that. And then Josh says, Paul showed me one when I visited him. I decided not to have it like that, since it was mostly for show, because of the modern steel is better. Oh yes, it depends what you want. If you want a combat blade or a sharp one. I mean, with a sharp sword, you don't fundamentally need it to be spring steel or made out of Eon 45, but with a combat blade, you do. And then Sam says, do you think you could send the link for that video? Just remind me what video I talked about, because I've already forgotten. I don't have the best memory. I've got a great memory, but some days my memory isn't great, and I got to write things down just to remind myself. And then I don't always have the time to re-watch the live streams on my videos, because I'm already editing a long video today, and I spent about 2 hours going through it. It's 45 minutes long, and it's on a controversial subject revolving around our current video, which is trending on YouTube, and I expect that could be our first video to get 1 million views, even though it's a non-related Viking video. It's just one of those funny meme videos from TikTok, which went viral 3 or 4 years back. Because I can remember back in the day when it went viral, went to like 6 million views, or another version of it, and my phone went mad and crazy for literally weeks and weeks and weeks. And it was quite an experience to have a video go viral on TikTok when and it's got like, 70,000 likes and 50,000 comments, and I'd never really been able to go through that video and actually reply to every comment, which I do try to do on here. And I've been having a bit of a comment session today, replying on my PC, and I did a little bit yesterday when I was out, because I had to go into Derby yesterday, and I had a nice pint in the Badminton Arms, and then I went to the place where I used to work, where I've been on strike. I've not been there since I worked there, but I snuck in. I had a pint in the standing order and sat in the back of the yard. And because I like going to Wetherspoons, because I can get onto their internet, and then I can edit videos or leave comments and do stuff like that. So yeah, so Josh says, I never asked what steel Paul used for my sword, but I assume it's good quality if I paid £800. Yes, it's going to be spring steel, and it's going to be EM44 or EM45, because even if you're not making a combat blade, you still want that sword made out of the best material. And spring steel is just a lovely material when it comes to making sword, because it heat treats properly. And of course, you've got to heat treat a sword so it's not soft and it won't break. And there's a craft and a skill to heat treating a blade, but you've got to get the heat right. You don't get too much heat, because that can make it too brittle and it could snap. And you don't want it to be not enough heat, because that'll make it not soft enough. So there really is a skill when it comes to heat treating. And it's amazing to see some of these old blacksmiths in the videos. When I saw a video from Japan where this 93-year-old man makes samurai swords, and they're like £10,000 a sword. And he was, I think it was, who's the guy that raced motorbikes on Channel 4? I forget. I cannot remember people's names. He went along, and he went to this old samurai sword place, and he was showing him on the forge, how he gets the right colour, and it's all done by experience. I mean, a lot of people these days, if they work in a forge, they'll have a heat gun so they can figure out how hot the forge is, so that they can figure out the right temperature to put your blade in to get it heated right. But if you get it too wrong and you put your blade in for too long, you could end up melting your blade, which is what you don't want, because then you've got to start all over again. And if you don't get enough heat, then it's not going to be soft enough, and too much heat can make it brittle and change all the carbons in that sword. So it's a skill. But some of these older blacksmiths that have been doing it for 50, 60 years, they can just tell by looking. And that is an amazing, amazing thing, really, really is. And then Sam says, have you ever had chog? I don't think I'm saying it right. The mushroom that grows on aspen trees. No, I've never heard of a mushroom called chog. Are you on about barber's mushroom, the one you could sharpen your knives with? Because you can eat that one. But it makes a great fire starter when you dry them and they go all black. But you could also dry them and then slice them and make into a really nice knife sharpener. For some reason, it's as tough as leather. And then Sam says, that's a beautiful sword. It sure is, yeah. We've got some nice things. I mean, well, we can go a little bit early in time and look at this. Although I don't like the handle on this. This is a Germanic sword or Germanic sea axe, because we often think about Eggles Rune video. Yeah, I will share it with you. So we often think about sea axes being broken back, but that's not fundamentally the case, because there's so many different styles of blade lengths and blade styles that it's not all about having a broken back. So this is more of a machete, really. And this is one from Celtic Red Merchant. I think it was about £40. But what I don't like about it is the handle, because already I can twist this handle round and it moves. So whoever put this together hasn't done a very good job when it comes to making the handle tight. They probably drilled it out and not actually heated the tang up, and then squashed the wood down, because when you do that and then you very quickly quench it, you get a much tighter fit. So the fact that this moves, I don't like. So at some point I'm going to have to grind this out and take off this brass cap and put a whole entire new handle on here. But I quite fancy getting a nice bit of antler, or maybe a bit of bone. Maybe something like this would be better, and then get rid of this handle, which is loose. And I mean, I've already demonstrated and used it a few times, like chopping a few things. And yeah, perhaps we could get this one and test it on some battles in the next few days in a live stream. But the fact that I can twist it, and I don't think you're going to, I don't know if you're going to see it on camera, but that moves around, that does. So there's a lot of play in that, and I don't like it, because if you're buying something, that should not happen. So it's probably being mass produced, and it's just not being properly put together, and you probably won't see it, but I can see it. And there's not a lot of movement. There's about 1 or 2 millimeters, but it's just too much for my liking, really. So yeah, it's gonna have to come apart. And it's got a tang going all the way through, because you can see the tang at the back there, although it's not been brilliantly knocked over. So I'm gonna have to slightly grind it, and then yeah. And then Josh says, why is Maxing Armories such a slow coach? Well, you talk about Maxing Armories when it comes to delivery time. It's because, well, he's got some great stuff and some nice items, but yeah, he's got such a bad reputation when it comes to delivery. And I mean, if I can find it, wait a minute. I've got a Maxing Armories Langsacks in here, and that took me some time. I saw it the other day. Where did I see it? Yeah, well, this is the perils of having too much stuff. You end up losing stuff, and then you can't even find it. But here we go. So this is a Maxing Armories. I think it's a Gotland, or yeah, this is a Gotland Langsacks. It's got a very nice handle, and I must say the handle doesn't move. But I waited 4 or 5 months to get one helmet I brought, and I brought this Langsacks, which is quite a short one. And I got to the stage where I had to threaten to take him to court just to get my stuff. And yes, he sent the Langsacks. No, he sent my first helmet, and then I was waiting for the Langsacks. And then with the Langsacks came another helmet, so he probably compensated me. And I think the only reason why I got a second helmet for free is simply because it's so big. I mean, you'll see this is one of the helmets I bought of Maxim. He's based down London, but I got 2 of these. But the other one is super massive. So I think when he got it, it was just too big to sell. So I think it's probably a reject. But it kind of would have fit Eggle's head. But Eggle never got to see it, really. He passed away. But it did take me months and months and months, and loads of emails in correspondence and me putting pressure on, trying to get him to send it to me. Because not long after I ordered it, I looked on Facebook, and I saw quite a few comments on his Facebook page talking about how bad he is at delivering stuff. And of course, it's all probably mass produced in India or China, to be fair. But it is a nice Langsacks. I'd love to know how tough it is. And the handle is very firmly on. But and it's been with over properly as well. So yeah, it's really nice stuff and quality to a certain degree for a starter set. I mean, yeah, if you wanted a really top quality set, and it never came with a sheath or a scabbard, that's a shame. So that's another job I've got to do in the future. And I'm going to make a Gotland style sheath for this down the line. but it was very frustrating. You shouldn't have to go to a trader and send them an email saying, you know, if I don't get my stuff, I'm going to take you to small claims court, because I've done that a few times when I've brought stuff and I never, you know, got it, and I've taken one or two traders to a small claims court, and 99% of the time they never argue the case, and you just get awarded the money. But so yes, so he said 2 months delivery. That's what he said to me. He said, oh, you should have it in 2 to 3 months. And it took me 5 or 6 months to get it at least, really. I mean, I'll have to go back in my emails and actually calculate how long it did take him to send me the 2 items. But he did send me a bonus helmet. So probably to make up for the fact that he, you know, and that's such an important thing. If you're a trader, you must really, you know, if somebody orders something, you must make sure they get it. And he's got some nice Vendel helmets, but I don't really fancy spending £1,200 or however much they cost, and waiting 6 months to get it. So if I'm ever going to buy from Maxim Armories in my life again, I'm going to do it at a physical show or at a reenactment market, so I can actually buy the item there and then not have to wait. But that can be a problem in reenactment and with traders, and certainly there was a guy from Ireland called Cormac O'Neill, and he gave himself such a bad reputation. His stuff was lovely. It was all handmade, but a lot of people just never got the stuff from him. And then Sam says, I never used the heat. It's all done by the human eye and the colour, and the metal starts to sweat. Little beads of impurities will appear on the surface. Yeah. And then some people will put a branch on top of the hot coals and see how quickly a little small branch burns. So there's different ways. Or I've seen a blacksmith putting some wood shavings on, and how quickly those wood shavings burn away to determine how hot the forge was. And they do this when it comes to, in the old days when they used to manufacture steel, they would throw some branches on top of the hot steel, and how quickly the branches burnt away, determining how hot the steel was. But you're talking back in the day, you know, in the 19th century, probably before and just after World War II, when things were done differently and not so modernised. In fact, you can see that in one of my videos where I got a video called The Great Melt, which is a documentary about forging and casting metal. And you'll see it in that video where they get branches on a massive hot plate of metal, and they throw the branches on because they're determining how hot that metal is, so they know they've got the right temperature. But of course, these are all these little secret bits of knowledge which we don't fundamentally have, and we've lost to time. And then Josh says, some of the Indian helmets are great. I bought a yarn helmet. It's great. Yes, I do want to get a copy of the yarn helmet, so that's on my list as well. But it's just a matter of time and a matter of money, and then trying to find a good seller. And I think Maxim Armories have them, so I'm going to buy a lot of stuff when I go to the reenactment markets at some point in the future. And then Sam says chaga mushrooms. That's the Swedish use a lot for tea. Yes, I've heard of that. And then Josh says, took me 3 weeks to get my purchasing. Well, that's not too bad for Maxim, but like I said, some people have waited a long time, months and months, and some people have actually never got the orders. So, and then we got a comment here from Krista Doom. So, hello, how are you from California? So lovely to see you. I did watch your video where you're doing a runes casting in respect of Eggle, and at some point I must share it on the community page so the rest of the guys can go and see it. And I did enjoy your video the other day when you were talking about crystals and crystal healing. I did watch that one. You was in like a suit, and I have left you a few comments as well in your video. So keep up the good work, my friend. I'll always be there to support you. And then Josh says, great helmet, 2 mil steel. Oh yes, I mean, 2 mil is a good size, but you know, it just depends on. And they do make some really good stuff. In fact, I know I know a company in Pakistan that make reenactment gear. So if I ever thought about doing it myself, I could certainly go to Pakistan or India, and I got some contacts. But there's also an awful lot of products from the medieval age which just don't get made. And I think having some of them made to sell them would be quite interesting. But again, it's all about time and money, and whether I want to go down the route of being a trader. but certainly with having a medieval channel, I could certainly at sometimes have some of that stuff to sell online and sell it to you guys if I wanted to, but I'm not sure I want to do that really. I was very close to becoming a trader many years ago, but I decided not to do it. There's a lot of work and a lot of commitment. And then Conquistador says, I had a great steel Conquistador helmet made in India. Well, yeah, they do make some fantastic stuff. They really do. But, I mean, certainly the price they're charging compared to what we're paying is a big difference, though. Because I know when I was looking at maybe becoming an American Civil War trader, you could have shirts and authentic trousers and tops made for £3 or £4, and then we're selling them for £30-40. So there is a massive markup between buying it in India and also having it shipped over and selling it over here. And in fact, a lot of the Indian traders even got grants from the UK to send stuff over to trade, and were having all the shipping paid for by the UK government at one stage, which is a bit of an insight and a bit of a knowledge that a lot of people don't know about. Whether that still goes on, I don't know. Because we do send money in the UK all over the world, and a lot of it goes to grants for other businesses to help, because they send the stuff over here and it helps our economy out and makes us more money. But there are some fantastic stuff out there. And yeah, and certainly when I first started my American Civil War reenacting, my first musket was a Tower musket, and Tower is an Indian make of guns. Tower guns have been going for years and years and years, and it was brilliant. I mean, I think I paid 70 quid for it, and it was one of the best muskets I ever had. In fact, it was so good and solid, I could put 2 rounds down and double load it and make a massive boom, boom, it would go. And oh, bloody hell, Andy's putting 2 rounds down again. And then Conquistador says, do you have a Civil War uniform? Well, yes. I mean, I don't have many out. I've got a couple of kepis out. All my uniforms are all tucked away. That's my Civil War cap. Well, they call it a kepi. And then you got the slouch hat. So you got the kepi and you got the slouch hat. The slouch hat is got more of a peak, and then they call it a slouch hat because it slouches down, and they're normally lined. And of course, these will be Indian made. Although some of the stuff are more American made, because I always try to go for American stuff. So that's why the reason call it a slouch hat, because it's got a much higher top and a much more material, and when you wear it, it just slouches down on your head. Now, at some point, I'll think about putting my Civil War uniform on and perhaps doing some Civil War content. Then we have an American-made hat, which is a much better quality hat, and I put a much more authentic peak on it. And of course, this is associated with the 14th Brooklyn. But this is actually, I cheated on this hat because this isn't actually a Union hat. This is a Confederate artillery hat. And underneath this blue patch will be a red patch. It will be all red for the Confederate artillery. And this one I've had for many years. This one I used to wear on camp, and I improved the quality by putting a better peak on. And a lot of them will have this brass mounting, but that went out very early in the war, because why would you have a brass mounting at the front? There's 2 reasons why they didn't have them as the war progressed. Because A, when you got a brass kind of a buckle on your strap, and that's a chin strap, so it's designed to go under your chin if you need to wear it, but most of the time it's not. It's just kept round the back, and it just needs a bit of sewing, this one. But the reason why they took these off, there's 2 reasons. First of all, they wanted to save on the brass, because a lot of brass was used in the Civil War. So they took these off because of the brass, but also, and the biggest reason, is because it's a massive target. It's saying to a sharpshooter, oh, look, I can see a brass shiny thing on his head. I'm going to aim for that. And, and bang, you get shot in the head with a round ball, which will just blow a big hole in your head. Or you get shot by a mini-A bullet, which will probably just travel down your spine and come out your arm. And, of course, you'll be dead again. So they took these away, which is why on this Civil War hat, you don't see one. It probably did originally have one, and I took it apart and took it off, and that's a bit of a Farby one, so that's not so accurate because it's cast, where the other ones were stamped out. And then this would have been, like I said, this was a Confederate artillery hat. So it was on camp. I think I paid £10 for it, and then I wanted to convert it to the 14th Brooklyn. So I glued on a blue round circle, and then this circle here represents First Corps. That's the symbol of the First Corps, but the different corps have different symbols and different badges. So that's First Corps, the round, patch. And then slowly through the war, these went off as well. It's got a nice material, the lined, and it's well used, and it fits my head perfectly, which I was happy about. Because when I was doing American Civil War reenacting, I was an ultra hardcore reenactor, so I wanted all my kit to be as authentic as possible. And at some point, when I get my act together, I will demonstrate and show you some of my Civil War uniforms, because I do have quite a lot of them. Because I was running my own regiment at one point when I had about 10 people in the regiment. So I was fundamentally uniforming and giving the uniforms to 10 people. And of course, also you'll see that number H, that's the company we were. Well, that H is way too big as well. So that's not very authentic, because the lettering, and that designates your regiment company. So normally there'd be 8 companies from A to G. Is it G, or whatever's the 8th letter of the alphabet? Without calculating it, I forget. So that's also too big. Although these numbers are pressed and embossed, so they're more authentic. But again, these gradually went out as well. And then the other thing about this helmet, it should have New York buttons and not the standard eagle. So that's also inaccurate. And I do love my Civil War uniforms, and I may get back into that hobby and think about introducing it to the channel. And trying to think if I've got anything else Civil War around me at the moment. Not really. Most of it, I've got 2 chests over there, Victorian chests, and they're just full of my American Civil War stuff. So at some point, I may think about dressing in the American Civil War and talking about it on camera, because I think that will be a good addition. And I certainly have enough knowledge and I've read enough books over the years to know how to talk about it. And it's a fascinating and it's an absolutely terrible war. It really is. The amount of men killed in that war was just outrageous. And as I said before, from Derby, where I live, we know between 30 and 40 men from Derby fought for both the Confederates and also for the Union. And Egil Thornton's relative was in a Confederate cavalry regiment and got shot at Gettysburg and then survived the war. So on the channel, we've got close connections, and probably a lot of people will have relatives that have fought in that war, especially in Europe. We don't realise. And I love to go around to some of the graveyards where we got an American Civil War gravestones in the UK of soldiers that came back to England. And then when they died, they had a Civil War gravestone embossed with the regiment and so forth. And that's quite common as well. And certainly if you go to Manchester and Liverpool, you will find statues of Abraham Lincoln, because, Manchester and Liverpool supported the Union, and all the cotton workers all went on strike throughout the whole entire war. And then, you got Birkenhead. They built a lot of these ships for the Union, but also for the Confederacy. And of course, I'm also quite good at singing songs for the American Civil War, so perhaps we could introduce that as well to the channel. And I'll sing you a few of the songs, because I do love the songs of the period of that war. It's fascinating. So, yeah. So that's the only uniform I've got American Civil War wise at hand I could see. So, yeah, that's something we can think about in the future to introduce to the channel. So let's just have a look at your comments. Then Conquista Doom says, your expertise on these things is truly awesome. Well, yeah, because I've been doing reenacting for many years. So, and the reason why I know a lot about the American Civil War, because I did it for many years. But I learned that knowledge from the guys that actually did it before me. I do have 2 more items here we can have a look at. if you bear with me a minute, hang on. So I've just seen these, and I've got two of the. Let's have a look. Right, yeah. So we've got two canteens here. Now this one is an early canteen from the American Civil War. Again, it's got 14 because it's got the regiment number I was in. But this is the early war canteen, where this one here is the bullseye one and is the late one. And there's a difference. You'll see on this one, you can see the indentations on the actual pattern of the pressing of the canteen. Now, these ones are both made from steel, but back in the day they would have been made from mild steel and they would have been tinned. So there would have been a mild steel canteen but tin, but we like to go for stainless steel because they purify better and also because they're a bit stronger. And then the early one is a smooth one, so this is smooth, and I don't know whether you can see it on camera, but you'll see it's dented, because over the time and period it's been full on. You know, you're in battle, and you know in reenactment, you know, especially in the 19th century, you have to sometimes drop dead in the battlefield and pretend you got shot. So if you fall down in one of these, what happens with the early war canteens is that you land on it and you squash it, and that's not good, because what you don't want, and water, especially in that climate in America, you know, if it's, you know, you're at Gettysburg and it's 40-50 degrees out there and it can be very warm early in the morning, you're going to get dehydrated, and dehydration is a very bad thing for a soldier, especially if you've got a march 20 miles to get to the battle and then go and take part in the battle. And that often happened, and especially at Gettysburg on the second day. So this is the early canteen because it's what you class as a smooth one, because it's just two basic halves put together and soldered, and it's got a smooth pattern. And then you have this one, which is the bullseye, and again, if you look, you'll see the indentations, the rings. Now there's a reason for this, because they realise that if they put rings in the pressing, when you land on it, you're not going to squash it compared to a plain one, because if you land on this, you're going to squash this, and it has been squashed. And even if you get one of the authentic ones made from pewter or the tin line, I got one and it's as flat as a pancake. So they developed later on in the war, around about 1862, they went to the, you know, the bullseye pattern. So all along here is indentations from the rings, so that when you land on it, it's got more strength and you're not going to squash it. And then the difference between this one here, because it's got a cotton sling, and this one with a leather one, because this is an officer's one, and I was an NCO. I was a non-commissioned officer, even though I didn't have shouldered things on my shoulder. I wouldn't wear them. I just kept myself as a sergeant because I was quite happy being a sergeant, and I didn't want to wear officer's bars on my shoulder and be a lieutenant. Well, you know, or in the UK we call him a lieutenant, which is quite interesting. So this has a leather strap, which kind of designates that this is an officer's one. And then when you're wearing it, it's always on this side of your body, and it's always on the left-hand side. And in reenactment terms, you cannot go into a American Civil War reenactment battle without one of these being filled with water, because that's one of the things as a sergeant and as an NCO I would check. I would literally physically pick these up from the men, and I would check to make sure that they've got a full amount of water in, because you need that water in the battle. And we can't even begin to imagine. And then, of course, we have the medieval equivalent here. If I just give me a second to unhook it. I don't know what that was. Oh, that's a hagstone. So this is the medieval equivalent of a canteen. And you can see the progression between, you know, 900 years of development from having a leather one to going to a metal one. And of course, the Confederates also had wooden ones as well, which were round and staved, which are quite fascinating. But generally, in the Union Army, you'd have one of these, and they're really good. They do save your life. So one of the jobs as an officer, and you have to go along and check your men and make sure these are all filled up. And normally, you know, you designate somebody beforehand. You'll say, right, Private Brown, go over here, go and collect all the canteen from all these men, and go and fill them up. And then you designate one man to go and fill them up. And of course, in the modern world, we go to a tap and we get pure, clean water. But in those times, you'll be drinking water from a stream probably, and you just hope to God that it's not contaminated. And of course, you had no way of purifying it. And if you had the chance, you would boil the water up beforehand. But that wasn't always a fundamental case. And it makes a big difference between you getting heat stroke and going down in the battlefield with heat stroke. Because let's face it, if you've got 1,000 men in a regiment and half of them go down with heat stroke, you just lost half your company and half your firepower. So it was vitally important that they had a source for water. And then another little secret about these is, well, you may be saying, well, why do they have a wool coating to it? And, you know, you may think, well, is that there simply to designate it being a Union canteen? Because, yes, the Confederate ones that were steel and were made of stave wood would have normally a grey wool. And, of course, the Union, being blue, would have blue. But there's a simple purpose for this, and it's a little hidden secret. But can anybody guess in the comments why I would have, and you have, a wool, you know, surrounding the canteen? Anybody guess? So I'll give you a minute to have a guess. Go on. Why is it lined in wool? Why is there wool over it? Why is it not pure metal? There's a very simple and very clever reason, and it's actually quite amazing. And when I learned this many years ago, I started practicing why and doing the reason why it's covered in wool, and it actually works. It's a very nifty little trick, and I'll tell you in a few seconds why we have wool around our canteens. It's not there to say, well, yes, this is a Union canteen. And you may be saying to yourself, well, if it was bright metal, it will stick out a bit and shine. It's a bit of a target. Well, yeah, it fundamentally is a target. But there's a very specific reason why you have wool around your canteen. And it's such an important thing, because what's the one thing you want your water to be when you're going into battle? You want it to be cold, don't you? Right. So there's a clue. You want your water to be cold. So in the American Civil War, and as well as other periods, even though if you think about the red coats and the American War of Independence, the red jackets didn't cover their canteens with wool. There was just pure metal. But as we progressed in time and we learnt more about the battles, and this was really learnt during the Crimean War, really, that they started surrounding the canteens with wool in the Crimean War, because a lot of the things from the American Civil War were actually learnt during that war, because it was the first modern war, really, when you think about it. And it was really very close to becoming the First World War as well, because of all the battles all over the place they was having. So the reason why you have wool around it is so when you fill it up, so let's say, you're going to a stream or you're going to a well and you're pouring in water, you would also cover this wool with water and make sure it's soaked. And the reason that is because when it's soaked, it evaporates and the water inside here cools down. So your water inside here will be cooler and cool and cold. And it makes a massive difference between drinking hot, warm water and cold water. So it's all about evaporation, and it's all about cooling your water inside your canteen. And I think that's fascinating. It really is, and it's so clever. And then these are fastened with a cork, because cork was also quite massive back in the day. And it's so important that when you have one of these, that your cork fits in well and doesn't become loose, because you're running into battle, this can tip upside down, and you don't want to also lose your water. So that's the reason why you normally just tap it down and make sure it's fastened in properly. And the better the fit, the better it is. And of course, this hasn't been used for a while, so the cork's gone a bit dry and could probably do with being replaced. It's got a little washer on the bottom, so it's just a very simplistic thing. And I've used this so many times. It saved my life so many times on the battlefield. And you very quickly, in half an hour to an hour, you'd go through one of these. You really would. So you also have to ration your water and not drink it too fast. So you'll be there. You're waiting for the battlefield, or you're waiting for your next manoeuvre, and you'll tell your privates. If you was an officer like me, you'll say, right guys, get some water down here, but not too much. Just have a swig. Cool yourself down, because if you drink this too quickly, you've got no water left. You could be in a serious situation. So it's also about being clever with the amount of water you've got, but not having too much. Yeah. And again, has a brass buckle that stayed during all through the war. it's got a leather backing, so it gives you a bit of protection on your shoulders. And you're wearing this, and you may have a rucksack, and you will have a haversack. But I can tell you now, those two things will weigh you down, and you get all muscle ache all the way around here. It's very much like wearing chainmail. You get the same pain from chainmail, because Monday I was out in my chainmail, and whenever I wear my chainmail, I can always feel it around my shoulders, around here. So you get the same problems in the American Civil War. Yes, these don't weigh as much as chainmail, but you're still getting the same neck ache and the same shoulder ache. And so if you've been doing the hobby for many, many years, you build all your muscles around here. And even, you've been doing it for years, you're still going to ache no matter what. And yes, it's always a fascinating and wonderful thing. So, any more comments for me to read? Yeah, and there's some really good manufacturers of American Civil War hats. There's one manufacturer, I don't know if he's going anymore, but I can't quite remember his name. And his hats are like $200-300 a hat. But they are, some of the best hats you make and buy. And of course, Conquista Doom was saying, of course, we make better Civil War hats. It happened here, ha. Well, you definitely do. If you're getting into the American Civil War, then try to buy American-made stuff and not go for the cheaper Indian or Pakistan-made stuff. Because most of it's made, in Pakistan or India. They don't really make much in China, from my recollection. And it's a good start off with. But most of my stuff I've either made myself or I bought when I've been to America. When I went to America the first time, I bought a load of stuff. And they've got loads of market stalls, all these traders and the amazing traders. So, I went over with like, $1,000 and I spent half of it buying better equipment and authentic equipment, because they were trying to go for that authentic look. And, I was trying to carry everything the soldier would carry, but you also learn not to carry too much, because you can carry too much. So this is why a lot of things got discarded, because you don't want to have your book, your Bible. You may not want to have a picture of your family, so you may discard that. So you're going to carry the essential things, and you soon learn as a Union soldier and a Confederate just to carry, the right essential things into battle. And that's the same in the modern reenactment world as well. Because, I've carried all the authentic things and I've slowly reduced what I carried, and because it weighs you down. So then Conquista Doom says, this is jaw dropping that English fought in the American Civil War. Well, yes. But, you think about the Irish, literally, tens of thousands of Irishmen left Ireland and ended up fighting for both sides. And then when you get, the Battle of Fredericksburg in 1862, where you got the massive stone wall on top of the hill, and you had the Confederate Irish Brigade who were behind the wall. And of course, that's the wall where Stonewall Jackson got his name from, because he was in charge of that battalion, I think, and that's where the name of Stonewall Jackson came from. And so, you got the Irish Brigade, full of Irish regiments, 5,000 or 6,000 men stood behind and fighting behind this stone wall. And then the Union generals, I think was it General Meade, decided to send in the Union Irish Brigade, because they thought that sending the Irish to fight against the Irish would be a very clever idea. And it probably was to a certain degree. But, and the thing is about the American Civil War, there's so many letters and so many diaries and so many accounts. So I read letters from, and diaries from the Irish Brigade of the Confederacy, and they talked about how, the Union, battalion of the Irish came up. And, some of these Irish men were crying with the realization that they was fighting their own kin. In fact, they was fighting their own sons and their own uncles, and even the case of sons fighting their fathers, because to determine where you landed in America, if you landed in the South, if you just landed, you jumped on the ship in Ireland to go to America, and, let's say the old story. So there's a village, right, in Ireland. It's 1861 or 1862. And the old village is suffering with starvation. So everybody sells the land to a landowner. and you already have enough money to pay for a passage to America. And there's a really lovely song about this, which I'll have to sing you one of these days. And so, you know, but there's too many of you to go into one ship. So you have to go on 2 boats. Now, one of the boats goes and lands in the Confederate States. And as soon as you land, those men are conscripted into the Irish Brigade. Got no choice. You got to do it. And then the other boat, of the other half of the Irish village, you know, goes and lands in the north. And again, you know, the Irish men are conscripted straight away. You know, they're given a ticket saying, well, this is going to be your wage. You're going to be earning, you know, $50 a month. And when you survive the war, we're going to give you a bit of land. There's a bit of a promise, which didn't always happen. So this is how you end up with the Irish Brigade of the Confederacy, and you end up with the Irish Brigade of the Union. And this is how we ended up at Fredericksburg when they was both fighting each other. So I've read the written accounts of the Irish Confederate Brigade, you know, talking about how terrible it was, knowing that there was fighting and killing their own family and their own kin. So could you imagine doing that? Could you imagine half your family ended up on the other army? So if we take it back to the medieval age, if we take it back to, let's say, Hastings 1066, and you know, half your family is Saxons and the other half of your family are Normans, and you end up fighting each other. I mean, that's a terrible, terrible thing to do. If you end up, you know, as a son, ended up fighting an army which your dad and your uncles are in, that's actually terrible, really is. So, you know, and if you've never seen the films Gettysburg and the first film, and I really do wish they would actually go and film the third film in that series, because I think it really needs to be made. Those 2 films are brilliant, and I've not seen them for such a long time. I've got them on DVD somewhere, but I don't have a DVD player. I'll have to watch them on my PC, but I love those films. They tell such an important journey and such an important story and history. And of course, the Civil War was such a brutal thing. But you know, we know for a fact from Derby, we had about 30 to 40 men take part. And then when I did some research into the regiment I was portraying, which is the regiment with, let me find it again, with this hat, the 14th Brooklyn, I had to decide what company was going to go for. Because back in the old days, there used to be Company B. And quite luckily with the 14th Brooklyn, there's quite a few companies all over the world, from Germany to Florida to New York and to, you know, to Ohio. And so we've got quite a few companies. So I had to decide at some point what company was going to go for. So I downloaded the list of all the men, and I went through each company, and I realised that in Company H there was quite a few Englishmen. In fact, there was one Englishman in the company I portray of this regiment, Company H, that was based in Leicester, came from Leicester, which is what, 30, 40 miles away. So that was really quite amazing, really. And that company had about 5 or 6 Englishmen, a couple of Irishmen, and some Scotsmen in it as well. So because we got those records from the American Civil War, we can actually trace the families and trace where the men actually came from. Because sometimes they would actually tell you if they're English, if they're Scottish, Irish, or French, or German, or, you know, and they even had a whole regiment full of Chinese, you know, and we often think about Asians and Chinese people and Asian people not fighting in the Civil War, but they did. And in fact, the Union had a whole regiment full of, Chinese immigrants, and they sent them back during the war to China to go and raise money for the Union. So, I mean, how amazing is that? So it really is quite amazing, really. And if you ever get a chance to go to some of the American Civil War battle sites, and do go to Gettysburg, and do go to the museums, and you see all these monuments, and they really are truly amazing, the monuments and all the cannons that are left over. In fact, when I went over for the first time in 1999 to take part in the battle reenactment of the Battle of Chattanooga, they was actually using brass and bronze cannons from the war. I mean, how amazing is that? I mean, and literally there was 5,000 people or more. I think there's more than that. I think there was 30,000 people at that battle, and they had about 3,000 or 4,000 cavalry on each side, you know, and that was amazing. You know, literally, the battle was that long. It was about 4 or 5 miles long, the battle, because there's that many people taking part in it. And you couldn't see the end of the Union and the Confederate lines in the battle reenactment. So, you know, certainly some of the massive events and some of the centennials, when you get really big dates like the 150th and the 140th, some of those battles have been really massive, with 40 to 45, 50,000 people taking part from all over the world. And that was truly amazing and a really amazing experience. And I do have lots of photographs of me, you know, in my Civil War uniform at these events. And I wish I took part in more, really, but I didn't. It's just the way it goes. So, yes. So, any more questions? We'll go to 2 hours. Then I've got to think about getting something to eat because I'm hungry. And I got to start uploading a video, which is going to be like 200 gigabyte of data to YouTube. So I may get out tomorrow, or I may wait a few more days. And then probably tomorrow, I'm going to probably go out in my Viking kit and film a few more videos. And I've got to think of, because I'm doing some mental health videos as well, dressed in normal clothes though, because I think they're more approachable. I mean, I don't think people want to watch a mental health video with me dressed as a Viking, fundamentally not. I mean, yeah, I'm wearing a necklace, and you can tell I'm wearing a Thor's hammer. I mean, the one I did yesterday, I wore a necklace, and it's one of the pendants. At some point, I'm going to do a crazy video where I'm going to compare a lightsaber to a Viking sword. So watch out for that, but I've not filmed it yet. And of course, I think somehow a lightsaber is going to definitely beat a Viking sword. And I've got a couple here. I've got a little handheld lightsaber knife, which I think is really cool. And I took these out of charity bins that have been thrown away. But I think that'll be a really interesting, cool video to talk about and compare a lightsaber to a Viking sword. So watch out for that one. And yeah. Oh yes, it's been another good live stream. I've got another, let's just talk about this to end with. This is another different type of sword. So you see already a more of a typical double-edged Viking sword like this one. But this is more specific. This is a Norwegian style, and this is a single-edged sword. And this is really nice. But the only problem with this I don't like about it is the hand grip is a bit short. So when you're using it on you know, in combat, the pommel catches your wrist, and I don't like it. So it's very important that when you buy a sword, that the length of your hand grip is long enough that it doesn't catch you with the pommel. That it's slightly inconvenient. And I've got to make a sheath or scabbard for this, but this is a single-edged sword, and this is the Norwegian style. Now, some people would say this is a Anglo-Saxon, but if it, you know, if it had a antler handle and a bone handle without the crossguard and the pommel, then yes, you could probably say it's a Anglo-Saxon. But because of this and this, it's classed as a sword. But I know me and Egg will debate over this. Thought, well, is it a sword or is it a Anglo-Saxon? We couldn't quite decide, but I've always said to him, well, if it's got a pommel and it's got a crossguard, then it's got sword fittings, and therefore, thusly, it's determined to be a sword. And I think this is a Paul Binns, but I'm not overly certain. But it's another nice one, and of course, it's got the concave end being single-edged, and this is another combat blade. And when you're on battle, you have to get your file and you run it down, and you make sure it's got a nice sound, so you know it's well made. And the reason why you have a file is so that you can ensure that there's no bits on your sword that are sharp, and that always gets inspected. And this has had a lot of use as well. This is going to be 35 years old as well, and it's had a lot of use over the years. And you have to check your cross guard as well to make sure that there's no sharp bits, and also your pommel. You run your fingers across. That's the best method for testing whether a sword is safe, is by running your fingers across it to check it. But yeah, that's safe. But I've got a lot of that to do. I've got to check around all my weapons. Not that I intend to really use them in combat, but it'd be nice to do some combat. If my friend Paul ever comes up from Plymouth, we're going to definitely think about doing some combat videos when he's here for a week. But we'll see. it's got to come up first. But yeah, just end the video on that. That's a very nice Norwegian style single edge compared to a double edge. And I do like this one. I've had this one a long time and I've used it many times into battle. So yes, I hope you've enjoyed this live stream. Thank you for all the people who have joined. This definitely been the best live stream we've done so far. You know, it's fantastic to have so many people join and all your comments. And of course, it's going to take a few hours to process over the next 20 hours. So tomorrow it should. I think I'm not sure whether they go public straight away or whether it takes time for the rendering from YouTube point of view. And I got to think about whether the comments show up or not, because you definitely want to include the comments in a live stream, because that's very important. Taking the time to leave a comment. And look, we just lost connection, which is a sign by the Loki and the gods that it's time to go. It's time to go and make a cup of tea and go and make something to eat. Maybe a bacon sandwich. Bacon sandwich and a cup of tea. Lovely. So yes, thank you for joining. It's been another excellent 2 hours. And thank you for your company as always on this channel. And until we meet again, you know, do watch the videos and do leave us a like and do give us a subscribe, because we're constantly working on the channel. I'm constantly updating and making better videos, and it's your journey as well as my journey. So take care, Josh. Thank you for interacting, and see you later, Sam and Conquista Doom. And all you guys, and let's not forget the ladies as well, because I know the ladies only make up 8% of our audience, but you know, they've got to be included. It's very important. So goodbye. Love you guys to bits. And as Eggle would always say, you know, let's make the world a better place. Goodbye.